In every generation, there is an individual who challenges us to look at the world in a different way. Often these figures can be quite controversial in the way that they challenge the status quo. You could call these individuals prophets. Jesus Christ was an example of one of these people. Charles Manson, perhaps a contentious example. And I feel confident comparing David Cage, the intellectual, storyteller, and the man responsible for the music for the 1995 Master System game Cheese Catastrophe starring Speedy Gonzales to those people. Hi, I'm Tom from Bleeping Sickness, and I have a BA, and I want to welcome you today to the second part of
Caged Heat. It must
our multi-part playthrough of the works of this remarkable thinker, developer, and visionary. For those of you just joining us, this is the second part of our playthrough of Cage's first game as director, Omikron, the Nomad Soul, or simply Nomad Soul. Nomad being a Greek word that means homeless. In the first part, we were introduced to the story of Kale, a police detective in a future dystopian city who has been missing for several days, as has his partner. We have gone to his place of work, the local police station, in order to follow this first thread of what is sure to be a complex and ultimately quite beautiful tapestry of video game storytelling. As you can see, for a moment there it seemed as if I was struggling somewhat with the controls of the game. I believe this was a deliberate design choice. Part of the conceit of Omikron, the Nomad Soul, is that we as players are literally inhabiting this avatar on screen. Therefore, if you take into account that fiction, the struggle to manipulate the limbs in such a way is illustrative of the peculiar sensation of being transported from our reality to a different level of consciousness, where instead of having your natural movements guided by brain impulses and muscle twitches, it is done using quite a poor tank control system which does not map to a computer keyboard particularly well. Now we are going through the dossier of past cases that exists on Kale's computer. I'd like to take this opportunity to apologise for assertions that I made in the first episode, where I talked about Cage as quite a prophetic author who was in some way commenting on our current society, or in a lot of cases predicting future trends within our society, and was commenting on them within the game. As you can see here, someone was arrested for publicly insulting the enlightened leader of this future setting, and if this had been this time last week, I would have assumed that this was a commentary on authoritarian regimes. You'll have also noticed that the photo of this leader appeared in the office. I have since learned that in fact none of the content in any of Cage's games is in any way reflective of anything in real society. He's not commenting on anything to do with racial politics, gender politics, class war, anything like that. As you can see here, further on in the computer we find another part of that wonderful tapestry that's being woven in front of us. A series of murders appear to have been occurring in the city of Omikron. The files detailing these murders are locked, suggesting that some information is being kept from us, from Kale, and therefore continuing on this delectable mystery. You can see the next part of our investigation has taken us to one of the other offices within the Omikron Police Department, and we find here through some examination a suspicious looking Droot salad, which continues the game's theme of being suspicious of health food fads, inherent also in the main character being called Kale.
Agent Investigator Kale 669. Report to Captain Leah's office immediately. The captain is expecting you.
Agent Kale 669. I expect an explanation for your disappearance. You've been taken off the case.
So Cage makes an interesting choice here, where he's clearly set up the mystery of your disappearance and your dead partner, and quite against the norm for storytelling, he then drops that entirely. You're no longer involved in that storyline. Instead, we're going to go in and get into a interrogation of a criminal who belongs to a terrorist sect called the Awakened.
My name is Jenna 712. I'm 24 cycles old. I'm a cargo pilot. I transport merchandise for the Tetra Trust. I met him once. I know almost nothing about him. In a bar, it was a while ago. I came in for a drink after work and he started to chat me up. I must have given him my name just to be left in peace. Maybe he kept it on his
reiterate here, of course, that none of David Cage's games are rooted in reality, and therefore this is not a commentary on men's terrible behaviour towards women.
lunch together today?
Now you'll notice here that Kale going for lunch with his girlfriend seems, again, quite ancillary to the main plot of his partner being murdered and having to solve that murder, and also his own disappearance. And yet it playfully defies our expectations here, and instead, indeed, we go for lunch instead of trying to solve a brutal murder.
Agent Kale, 669, come in. There's a holdup going on in the supermarket in your sector. 8 armed robbers have been reported. They may be hostages. Go immediately to 816 Zodier Street. Reinforcements are on the way. Over.
Now, the decision to allow the player to actually drive the flying car is an interesting one, and one we must assume is deliberate and not rooted in a lack of budget or an exceedingly small map around which the Cage did not want players to have any control. Video games are an inherently violent medium, and this is something that David Cage understands better than any other, as the game frequently critiques mass violence and shooting, especially in these sequences where you click the game rapidly to shoot people in the face and murder them.
The regeneration beam is already doing its work. You'll be all right. Take a medikit as soon as possible and eat. Your strength will return quickly.
After the shootout that almost claimed Kale's life, were it not for some swift shooting on behalf of the player here, we have gone to the apartment of Jane, the woman he interrogated in the police cells, and we're going to see what we find. By rummaging around in this woman's apartment, we have found a note which ties her to the enlightened sect, who presumably are the cause of a certain amount of discord within the city of Omikron, and we're going to go and going to use that new information to interrogate her further. Now, it can't be overstated quite how influential Omikron the Nomad Soul is, especially on a little game called L.A. Noire, which, much like Omikron,
Well, Agent Kale,
provided an extremely linear mystery, which
you can go about your
nonetheless requires a lot of tedious back and
do me a
forth, which
favor,
really
get me a
isn't
cup of
particularly
coffee.
enjoyable at all, therefore providing an accurate simulation of the real-life processes of police work and investigation, which are themselves really quite boring. Now again, Cage is playing one of his devilish tricks with the puzzles in the game. Kale has been asked to go and get the director a cup of coil, a request that if the player follows it will result in many minutes, possibly even hours, of fruitless searching around the entire building in search of this drink, which of course doesn't actually exist. It's not unlike the pranks played on new members of businesses, such as asking them for some skyhooks or tartan paint. A wry and quite welcome bit of levity in this game, which of course tackles very serious themes such as salads. Now the game is interesting in how it switches up the level of expectation in the player. There are times where it seems almost like it's holding your hand in the way it's guiding you to each new plot point, and there are times where it's completely inscrutable and you have no idea what you're meant to do next or where you're meant to go. And in that way the game keeps you guessing in a way that is quite different from today's standard of entirely linear or else entirely open world games. It is somewhere in the middle, and therefore makes for a very interesting, often frustrating experience. That said, if you do try and leave an area before it's fully explored, the game will knock you back to the area that you're supposed to be in. As you see here, I tried to leave the police station to go to Kale's apartment, and I'm immediately sent back. In this way, Cage is commenting on how we cannot resist the call of destiny. If we are called to action, we cannot escape from it. It is also perhaps suggesting that we have a responsibility that often can't be denied, and in this way he is perhaps commenting on how our own society expects us to fulfill certain roles, such as mother, father, teacher, lover, or giant police robot operator. So perhaps this is a good place to leave you as I play along with this intentional wild goose chase, and we'll return next time to explore more of this Kafkaesque world of Omikron, the Nomad Soul.